Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kari, and today I'm going to be giving you a little update on my 2024 reading journal. Maybe you already saw this video where I went through and showed you every spread that I created for my 2024 reading journal, and today I'm going to be flipping through and showing you how I use those spreads that I already showed you, as well as showing you some brand new spreads that I created since that video. So without any further ado, let's jump in and see what 3 months of using my 2024 reading journal looks like. So already with the index, you can already tell that I've added a good few spreads since you saw my journal last. So not only am I looking forward to you seeing these spreads that I've already started to use, but also seeing these brand new spreads that I've created since the last time we talked about my journal. So I haven't went through and marked anything here because these are things to mark off at the end of the year once I've accomplished them, because they're kind of like yearly goals. So I can't really have accomplished them yet. So nothing new to report here. As I talked about in that last video, I am still looking for 2 more reading goals to put in these 2 slots. So if you have any ideas, definitely let me know. Here is where I was keeping track of the 24 books that I want to prioritize in 2024. So it's on this page and then also on this page. So as you can see, I have already read The Goldfinch. I did a dedicated review to this book because of how much I loved it, if you want to check that out up here. I also read How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time. And the third book that I've read from this list is Fragments of Horror by Junji Ito. So as you can see, I still have a good few books that I still need to read from this 24 books in 2024 list. And over here on the left, you can see that my reading goal for 2024 is to read 65 books. And we can see that as of the end of March, I have read 20 of those 65 books. According to Goodreads, I am ahead of schedule on my reading goal, so that's really exciting. Over here on the right is where I keep track of, did I read every day? And that can be just for 5 minutes. Did I read for 5 minutes? And it can be counted for this spread. And then over here in the little box, you can see that I keep track of how many days per month did I read at all. So we can see that in January, I read 24 out of the 31 days. In February, I read 22 out of the 29 days. And in March, I read 22 out of the 31 days. So honestly, it's really not so bad. I think I'm doing pretty good for reading every day. And of course, at the end of the year, I'll mark down how many days out of 365 days did I read. Then on this spread is where I keep track of one of my reading goals. As you can see here, one of my reading goals is to read 30 minutes every day. As I said in my previous video, I don't actually expect myself to read literally 30 minutes every single day. It's just something to shoot for. So here's where I keep track of how well I achieve that goal. And honestly, I would say that I'm doing pretty well. There are a few slots here and there where I go a couple of days without reading 30 minutes, but overall, I mean, I'm pretty happy with this. Then on this spread over here on the left, I keep track of which days do I finish a book. This is a brand new spread to me. I've never tracked this before. I just wanted to see if there's any trends in what days I finish a book. And actually already after 3 months, it is kind of interesting to see that I typically don't finish books towards the beginning of the month, that they're more focused at the end of the month typically, which makes sense because, you know, I want to finish the book to count it for that particular month. And then at the beginning of the month, you know, I'm probably starting new books, with the exception of this one right here at the beginning of March that I finished. So, I mean, already I think that this is an interesting spread. Then over here on the right is actually a spread that was recommended for me to do last year in my reading journal video, and that's to do the alphabet challenge. So anytime a book starts with one of the letters of the alphabet, to keep track of it and see, can I do all of the letters of the alphabet? So just to give you a few examples, you can see that A, I read Aesthetica. F, I read Fruits Basket. I read In Defense of the Act. P, I read Paradise Rot. W, which is probably a difficult one, I just read What I'd Rather Not Think About. So as you can see, I mean, I'm filling it up pretty well. It's actually filling up faster than I thought it would. So this is a really fun spread to do. Then here are some specific reading challenges that I set for myself this year. As you can see, I've already accomplished 2 of them, and that is to read a book over 700 pages. The Goldfinch definitely achieved that one for me. I think it's like 850 pages or something. And then another goal, read a book in 1 day. I read Paradise Rot in 1 day. So I do still have some other challenges to meet throughout the rest of the year, and I do still have this empty spot down here. If you have any ideas for a specific reading challenge, definitely let me know. I would love to hear your ideas. Then on this spread, we have the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge for 2024. This is kind of difficult, I'm realizing. You know, as you can see, I only have 4 books that have accomplished any of the reading challenges. There's one for A Building's Roman, which I put for The Goldfinch. Set in the Future, The Drifting Classroom, which is a manga. Came out in a year that ends in 2024. I put How to Argue with a Meat Eater, that came out this year. And then I kind of cheated that there's a prompt for a complete sentence title, and I put How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time again. I don't know, I was just finding this challenge really difficult, so I allowed myself to use the same one twice. Actually, this one down here, 24 letters in a title, I just read What I'd Rather Not Think About, and it has 25 letters in the title. I was so close. I'm really upset about that one. Next is where I keep track of how many books did I read per month. As I talked about in my previous video, I did bump up the slots from 12 to 24 this year because I have been reading manga, so I thought that that could boost my numbers considerably and that maybe, you know, I would be closer up here than to 12. But as you can see, that hasn't happened. I actually read a good amount of manga in January and haven't read so much in February and March, so that's kind of why it looks so pitiful down here, but it's actually not so bad. I mean, I read 5 books in both of these months. But I would like to be reading more manga again, so hopefully those numbers will be boosted back up and getting closer to 24. Then over here on the right is just kind of like an at-a-glance statistics page where I'm keeping track of how many books did I read, how many pages did I read, how many were fiction, how many were non-fiction, how many were originally published in English, how many were translated, how many days per that month did I read 30 minutes a day, how many books in my 24 books I want to read in 2024 list did I read, how many rereads did I do, how many 5 stars did I read, and how many books did I buy. So it's really interesting to go through and compare month to month. So as you can see, in January I read 6 translated books. That's because I read a good amount of manga that month, so it's translated from Japanese obviously. And then February and March I read 3 translated books per month, or the fact that in January I read 1 book off my 24 in 2024 list. In February I read 2, and March I didn't read any off of that list. So it's just really interesting to get an overall view on some particular statistics. Next over here is where I'm keeping track of monthly star ratings, just to, you know, based on star ratings, which month was the best. So as we can see, if we were just looking at star ratings, March has been the best month for me because it had an average of 4.5 stars. But honestly, it hasn't been a bad year at all. As you can see, I've only had 2 books that were 3 stars and nothing below that so far, which is excellent. I'm really happy about that. And that I've had 4 5 stars this year, which is really, really cool. I'm obviously really happy about that. So this is just interesting. If we were only looking at star ratings, how successful was each month. Then over here we have a little spread where I'm keeping track of books that I do not recommend. I don't know, maybe I'll do a video at the end of the year talking about all the books that I didn't like this year. As you can see, I have The Only One Left by Riley Sager and Orange, which is a manga. Now, did I hate either one of these? No, obviously there was no books under 3 stars. It's just not books that I super connected with. I didn't love them, so they ended up on this list. Then we have my 2024 best book bracket, where each month I put the best book that I read, and they're all going to be competing to become the best book that I read in 2024. As you can see, in January, The Drifting Classroom was the best book that I read. That's a manga. In February, of course, it was The Goldfinch by Donna's Heart. And then in March, it was Soldier Sailor, which was just excellent. So these are the best books from the first 3 months of the year. And so you can see that they've started off on their own little portion of the bracket. And as the year goes on and these start to fill up, all the different books will be competing and going further and further in the bracket. On this spread, I'm keeping track of the books that I gave 5 stars that I would consider to be my favorite books of the year. So then again, obviously these 3 books that were my favorite books each month, these all got 5 stars, and so they've become a part of this 5-star favorites spread. Now you'll notice that they're in a different order. You know, I'd read The Drifting Classroom first, I read The Goldfinch after that, and then I read Soldier Sailor. But here I'm going to be ranking them from most favorites to least favorites. So you might be wondering, well, how did I get them in this order? Because if I read The Drifting Classroom first, well, wouldn't I have to attach this here and then continued out throughout the whole year? Well, this is something that you're going to be seeing a few times in different spreads throughout my reading journal. Is something that is really, really cool. And I can't remember for the life of me where I saw someone use this in their journal. So if you know someone who has used this, definitely let me know in the comments because I would love to give them credit. I just cannot remember where I saw this. But anyway, it's that I've started using these Velcro pieces so that I can move around my different rankings. So, you know, first, when I started this spread, I had The Drifting Classroom in first because that's what I read in January, right? So I hadn't read these books yet. So it was my number 1. Well, and then when I read The Goldfinch, I mean, this is going to be a new favorite book of all time. So The Drifting Classroom got bumped to 2nd place, and I put the Goldfinch in first, okay? Well, then in March, I read Soldier Sailor. Well, Soldier Sailor, I liked more than the Drifting Classroom, but less than the Goldfinch, okay? So the Drifting Classroom got bumped to third place, and Soldier Sailor got put into second. So it's really, really cool. I'm obsessed with this. You're gonna see that I've implemented it into multiple different spreads later on in my journal. It's just really, really fun to be able to move things around because, you know, obviously normally I use scrapbooking glue to attach things like permanently, right? But here I'm not committed to anything. I'm able to move things around, which is really, really fun. So later we'll see this being used more. Then on this page, I'm keeping track of how many pages that I read per month. As you can see, in January, it really exploded. Like I said, I read a lot of manga that month. So I read almost 4,000 pages in January, whereas in March, I read no manga. So it's a lot less pages. So it's just really interesting to see month over month. How does the page count change? Then on the next page are my genres read. As you can see, literary fiction has just taken off. I've only read one thriller this year, which is really sad, and especially because it was the only one left. As you saw in a previous spread, I didn't even enjoy it. I've read 2 nonfictions. I did split this manga one in half just because I'll probably be reading a lot more manga than just the single spaces. So I split it in half. So I've read 2, 4, 6, 8 manga this year, and I've read 1 short story. Then on the next spread, I'm keeping track of how many pages were in each book that I read. So for example, as you saw back here, I have read 1 short story, so that's going to be up here because it was a short story. So I have read a good amount of short books already this year, but I've also read some longer ones and a lot less in the middle range of page numbers, which is really interesting. That's why it's really interesting to keep track of these type of statistics, because you can see things like that. Like I would have never put that together if I didn't keep track of this statistic. Then on the next spread, we have hours read per month, which is interesting to compare to the pages per month spread. So obviously I read a lot of pages in January, and that makes sense because it's the most hours that I read too. However, it's really interesting that, you know, this looks like a lot less pages compared to this, right? Well, if we look at the time, it's really not that much less hours than January. Again, that's because I was reading a lot of manga in January, so it's fast to read, but it's a lot of pages. So these two statistics are really interesting to compare and contrast to each other. So as we can see, in January, I read like 30.5 hours. In February, I read 29, and in March, I read 22 hours. Then this is another one of those new spreads that I started this year, and it's really, really fun because I want to read more translated fiction like I put in my 2024 reading goals over here. So I want to keep track of where are the books coming from that I'm reading. So obviously I've already read a book from the US and also England. And of course I've already talked about reading a bunch of manga. So of course Japan is already colored in, but then I've also read a book from Norway and Sweden and also the Netherlands. So I just love this spread. I can't wait for the map to fill up even more throughout the rest of this year. Then on this page is a new type of spread that I'm trying this year, like a line graph type spread. So over here on this axis are the number of books that I read per month, and then over here are the number of pages, and then down here obviously are the months. So in January, as we already saw, I read 10 books and about this many pages. So about this many pages, we already talked about the number. Then in February, I read 5 books, and in March I read 5 books. So I don't know, it's going to be more interesting, I think, once I have more data, like especially once I complete the year and I have my December data to see what are the trends of these two different statistics throughout the year. Then over here, I'm keeping track of my rereads. I would like to reread books more often, so I created this spread to encourage myself to do that. As you can see, I have already done 1 reread this year, and that was The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, but I would like to read more rereads this year. Then over here, I'm keeping track of my library books read. So these are books that I've gotten from my Libby app. So for example, But's A Backstory by Heather Radke, I listened to on audio on my Libby app. Then I also got Orange, which is a manga, as an ebook from Libby, but I'm hoping to fill out this list more and more throughout the rest of the year because, again, one of my 2024 reading goals is to listen to more audiobooks, and I do get my audiobooks from the library. Next is the spread where I'm keeping track of my manga series. The last time I talked to you, I hadn't had anything in these big portions right here, and I asked for help. Like, I realized I shouldn't have done that. Do you have any ideas of what I can put in here? And luckily, one of you guys had a really good idea of just putting like how many acts or chapters or volumes are in each of the books in the series. So for example, in Sailor Moon, there are 10 books, but within each book, they count which act numbers are in each book. So for example, volume 1, it has acts 1 through 7. So I have only filled out these little boxes for the volumes that I own. So let's just take Nana, for example. I own 3 volumes of Nana, so I've completed the little boxes. So book 1 is the prologue, book 2 is chapters 1 through 4, and book 3 is chapters 5 through 8. So for the rest of these, I don't own them yet, so I don't know which chapters are inside. And then the yellow boxes, as you can see here, are when I read the volume. So again, the little slots are that volume exists, and then the yellow filled in means that I have read it. However, the only caveat to this is for Yona of the Dawn. There are so many volumes of Yona of the Dawn, I don't even remember how many there are. So I've cut it off at 16 because I don't even know if I'm going to like it enough to even get to the end. So why would I take up so much space in my reading journal to devote to volumes of Yona of the Dawn if I don't even know if I'm going to continue? You know what I mean? So I have bought the first 3 volumes and I've read the first volume. But if I do continue through volume 16, obviously I'll just make a new spread for my manga series, and I need to anyways because I don't have any more space. And if I want to start any other series, then I need the room. So that's the explanation on that. Next is my anticipated releases spread. I still haven't fixed the spelling here. One of you had a really good idea of how to fix that. I just haven't done it yet. And actually, I haven't really bought too many of my anticipated releases yet this year. So as you can see in January, The Fury came out. I have already gotten that. So obviously for the rest of the first 3 months of the year, that's the only anticipated release that I've bought so far. Now, just because I haven't bought the rest of these does not mean that I'm not interested in them anymore. I just haven't gotten them yet. So as you can see, as I hear about new releases that are coming out, I do add them to the table. Now you might, now that I've turned this, you might see that this is July and you'll see that I've already marked this as if I've bought it. That's because I have pre-ordered it. So if I've pre-ordered it, I mark it. So this is for the Proust Clothbound Classic reprints. If you're a Clothbound Classic collector like I am, big news, hopefully you heard about it, that Penguin is re-releasing the Proust Clothbound collection. So I have already pre-ordered those. You can see here that August is going to be a big month. There's lots of things coming out in August. And then if we look at the last 4 months of the year, again, we already have one that I've pre-ordered, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Duh, of course I had to pre-order that already. I'm so excited. I pre-ordered the signed edition from Waterstones. So looking forward to that. But as you can see, the last 3 months of the year, there hasn't been too many announcements yet. So I only have 2 things for the last 3 months of the year. But this is just really fun to keep track of all the books that I'm excited about that are coming this year, and to keep track of when I buy them or if I pre-order them. You know, I don't want to forget that I've already pre-ordered something and buy it again or something. I don't know. It's just a really practical tracker for my anticipated releases. Next, speaking of buying books, this is where I keep track of all the books that I've bought so far this year. As you can see, I've already bought, well, this page is for 32 books, but I have continued already to the next page. So I have bought 37 books so far this year. So what I do, I keep track of when I read that book. So as you can see, I've already read a good few books that I've bought, so that's great. Over here, I keep track of what day did I get the book, and I also keep track of if I've included those books in a book haul on my channel. And over here is something that I'm doing for the first time this year, is keeping track of how much money did I spend on each of the books. So then at the end of the year, I'll be able to see how much money do I spend on books, which I think is going to be really interesting. Now you'll notice on this page, I don't have a date for these 3 books yet because I've ordered these from Amazon Japan, but they haven't arrived yet. So I'm going to put the date that they actually arrive in the spot here. So these didn't count for my March hauled books because I haven't received them yet. So as I talked about last time, I did leave a good few empty pages for the book haul because I do buy a lot of books. By the way, this is a new washi tape that I just recently got. I'll link the small shop that I got it at in the description box. But all the other washi tape that you've seen so far, I talk about it in the previous reading journal video that I've already done. I say for every single washi tape that you see, I tell you which shop that I got it from. Here, I'm keeping track of my 2024 ARCs. As you can see, I have not gotten any ARCs. That's because I haven't asked for any this year. So logical that I don't have any because I haven't asked for any. But this was just in case I wanted to ask for any ARCs this year, I could keep track of them. Then this is a really fun spread, my halfway top 12. So at the end of June, I want to know what are my top 12 books. Then this will lock in place. And then starting July 1st, I'll start a new ranking. You know, I'll copy paste whatever ranking I have here and put it here. And then I'll be able to move things around because you guessed it, I'm using the little Velcro things again. So I've already been moving around my little books to what order I want them to be in, and it's just really, really fun. I'm seriously obsessed with this Velcro thing. I just think it's so cool. It's just really easy that when I read a new book and I want to add it to the list, I can just move all the books around to put them in the list that I want, because The Goldfinch is my number 1, and then it goes down to my number 12 top favorite book of the year so far. So yeah, I would just highly recommend this little Velcro system because it's so nice to be able to move things around and to rank things how I want them to be ranked, and that at the end of July, I'll I'll know what are my top 12 favorite books. And then of course at the end of December, I'll be able to do the same thing to see what are my end of year top 12 books. And it will be really interesting to compare, okay, at the end of June, what were my top 12 books? And then how did it change to the end of December? What got kicked out of my top 12, you know, and what arrived that I hadn't read yet at the end of June? What arrived and ended up being a top 12 favorite book. So as you can see, obviously The Goldfinch is the best book that I've read so far this year. It's became a favorite book of all time. Then Soldier Sailor, then The Drifting Classroom, that manga, then Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I really enjoyed this book a lot. Then Paradise Rot, then The Details, which I read for the International Booker Longlist. I really liked that one. Then In Defense of the Act by Effie Black, which I read for the Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist. Then What I'd Rather Not Think About, which I also read for the International Booker Longlist. So I don't have these 4 spots filled up. Obviously, I could add my next 4 favorite books, but I haven't loved anything so much that I think it will end up on my top 12 by the end of June. So I'm just leaving these spaces open because I'm hoping that I'm going to be reading more books between now and then that will be added to this list. Does that make sense? So anyway, that's my top 12 spreads. Then on this spread, I have a visual of what books have I read so far in 2024, as well as the star rating that I gave each book. So as you can see, Fruits Basket, which is a manga, was the very first book that I read, and then I go through the year like this, and then I have my little star rating just below. I've already gone to the next page, so as you can see, I have read 20 books so far this year, as we already saw in a previous spread. So here you can really just see a really nice overview of all the books I've read so far this year. Of course, lots of literary fiction, some manga, some nonfiction, some prize books once we get more recent. And I just really like this, that it's a really easy way to see, okay, what have I read so far this year? I have left a good few pages blank in case I need those. I mean, I will obviously be dipping into those other pages. Then I have just a text version of what we just saw. So visual version, text version, it's literally the exact same thing. I'm just listing, writing out what are the books that I've read so far this year. I just love an excuse to use my reading journal, okay? So I have this next page here already filled out, and I'll probably need to get into this page later in the year. Then this is the last spread that you saw in my previous video, but it was empty. So now you can see it completely filled out. So as we know, in January, I read 10 books. I read 8 fiction books, 2 nonfiction books. I read 5 manga, 2 nonfiction, 1 literary fiction, 1 thriller, 1 short story. And then you can see my breakdown of the different star ratings that I did. I read this many pages for this amount of time, and I hauled 21 books in January. Then over here, you can see my breakdown of day per day. How many pages did I read and how long did I read? So as you can see, let's just take the example of January 10th. I read 218 pages and I read an hour and 17 minutes that day. So using this information is how I'm able to fill out this information, which in turn helps me fill out this information. So pages read and time read. And also for this spread where it's just a visual statistics month over month. So all of that information comes from here. Then of course for the hauled number, I'm using my books hauled spread. Then you can see down here that I decided the best book that I read in January was The Drifting Classroom, which is the book that made it to my best book per month bracket. So this is the information that I'm using to complete this spread. And then the worst book that I read was The Only One Left. But if we turn the page, you'll be able to see all the books that I read that month. And obviously sometimes it's going to spill into another spread. So as you can see, I do keep track of various information for each book. This is something new that I'm trying this year, to put 3 books per page, because in previous reading journals, I was dedicating 1 page to 1 book, which was just ridiculous because I never went back and wrote in my review. My review was never long enough to fill up the whole page. This system is really working for me. I'm definitely going to keep this system of putting 3 books per page. So I do want to go through and show you what information I'm putting for each book. So as you can see, these are the first 6 books that I read in January, and then these are the final 4. So let's just take the example of Convenience Store Woman. Okay, so I put the title Convenience Store Woman. It was 163 pages. It took me an hour and 52 minutes to read it. Again, I use the app Bookly, the premium version, to time every single time I read, so it gives me a bunch of statistics per book. Would highly recommend. Then I put the genre, so literary fiction. I gave it 4.75 stars and I read it physically. Then I put my little review here, so I say a frank look at societal expectations that are put onto women and how their own opinions and happiness aren't taken into account. So to me, that was the most important part to say about this book, and I just put it there. You know, I don't need to say too much per book. It's just the standout point points that I want to remember from each book. So again, these are all the books that I read in January, and then it jumps to the February stats. So as we can see, I read 5 books in February. All 5 were fiction. I didn't read any nonfiction, and I was reading literary fiction and manga the month of February. Here are my various stats. So I read about 1,700 pages, but I read 29 hours in February because the good old goldfinch, baby. I was living in the goldfinch in the month of February. It was fantastic. I only hauled 4 books, and then these are my breakdown of day per day stats. As you can see, I was living my best life towards the end of February, finishing up the goldfinch. I was reading 2.5 hours per day, just completely consumed by the goldfinch. God, I want to relive that again. That was so amazing. But anyway, obviously the goldfinch was the best book that I read in February, and the worst was Orange, that manga. And then if we turn the page, we can see the breakdown of the 5 books that I read in February. So as you can see, the goldfinch, 864 pages. It took me 22 hours to read that book. So it's interesting, you know, I read 29 hours in February, but 22 of them were dedicated to this one book, because obviously these other, I read 3 manga. They didn't take me too long. They each took me about an hour to read. So, the goldfinch was my February, and I don't regret it. As you can see, a new favorite book. Yeah. Then after the month of February, I had some new ideas for new spreads that I wanted to add. So obviously this is another new spread that I've added since the last time you've seen my journal, and that's the publication date for all the books that I'm reading. So my breakdown is kind of funny. I had to make choices because I couldn't make a column for every single book, obviously. So how I did it was pre-1900, 1900 to 1950, 1951 to 2000, 2001 to 2010, 2011 to 2015, 2016 to 2020, and then I go year by year. So 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. So for example, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, that fell into this column, but a bunch of these prize books that I'm starting to read are all from 2023, from last year. And actually what's really interesting is that a lot of the manga I've been reading falls into this category. I don't know, I never would have thought that, but again, these types of spreads really point out interesting statistics like that you wouldn't have realized otherwise. So this spread is really cool. I'm interested to see which column is the highest at the end of the year. Then on the next page was actually an idea from one of you guys that you put in the comments of that reading journal video that I did in January. Thank you so much for the idea. I love it. And it's obviously a book bingo. So over here, I've created my little chart, and this is where I have all the little prompts to complete the bingo. And of course, as you've seen, obviously throughout this flip through, that I like to have the images of books for my different spreads. But I was like, well, if I print out the book cover and put it on top, I don't remember what the prompt was. So I was like, well, I'm going to make the prompts on one side and then complete the bingo with the pictures on the other side. And I think it's really working out. I think it looks nice. So obviously, since you haven't seen this spread yet, I thought we could go through the different prompts that I have, give you some inspiration if you want to do your own book bingo. So first we have a multiple POV thriller, a cover by, a debut author, a book from the International Booker long list, which obviously I've done that already. The first book that I read from the long list was The Details, which I loved. Reread, a favorite. Again, I'm trying to encourage myself to reread more this year. A women's prize for nonfiction long list book. I am in the middle of a book that would fit this prompt, but I haven't finished it yet. Banned in the US, has won an award, has a favorite cover, adapted to a movie, have owned since before 2020. So for this one, I used The Goldfinch. I've had that book since 2019. Then we have a memoir, a mashed potato book. If you know, you know. This is a reference to the Books Unbound podcast with Ariel Bissett and Raylene LeMay. Basically, it's just a book that you've been wanting to read for a long time, but you've been putting it off, and you should just read it. So technically, I could have used The Goldfinch for this one too, but I decided to use it for this prompt instead. Then we have last book in a series. So I put the third and final book of the Drifting Classroom manga series for that. Has an ugly cover, set at a university, because if you know me, you know that I love academic settings. Adapted to a TV show. I did put Yona of the Dawn because there is an anime adaptation of this manga. Then we have a third read from an author. Technically, I could have used this third volume of the Drifting Classroom, but again, I didn't want to use one book twice on this if I can avoid it, so I'm leaving that spot open. A Fitzcarraldo edition, so this is a publishing house that I really appreciate. I want to read one of their books. A 2024 release, I have How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time. Although I'm questioning myself, this might have come out literally like a few days before 2024. I need to look into that again, but I might need to change this one. A short story collection. I did read The Lottery already, but I only read The Lottery. I didn't read like a complete collection of short stories from Shirley Jackson, so that doesn't count. A fantasy book. A women's prize for fiction long list book. I have read In Defense of the Axe. A book that I found on Bookstagram them in a multimedia book. So for example, a book like House of Leaves that has like emails in it, text messages, faxes, pictures, I don't know, just something that has more than just text in it, because I find those types of books really fun. Then we have, oh my god, I love this spread so much, my 2024 prize spread. So as you can see, I am using the little Velcro pieces again to move things around, and I am just obsessed with this spread. So basically, as you can see, I've created 18 prizes that I want to award at the end of 2024. Now, as I'm reading, I am filling in which book would win that prize as of right now. But obviously, because I'm using the little Velcro things, I can switch out when other things take over. So if we take the example of The Goldfinch, which I've put as the best book that I've read in 2024. Now, imagine that I read something later in the year that I like even more than The Goldfinch. Now, can I imagine that happening? Not really, but wouldn't that be amazing if I read something that I loved even more than The Goldfinch? That would be incredible. But if I did, I would be able to take The Goldfinch off of here and then put in whatever book beats out The Goldfinch. But right now, it's The Goldfinch, so I'm going to leave that there. So you have the idea. So let's go through and talk about what the different prizes are and what's winning those prizes so far this year. So this is just best overall. Could be any genre. Here I have best literary fiction. Now, of course, The Goldfinch is literary fiction, but I don't want the best book to be the best in another genre, if that makes sense. So the best literary fiction that I've read that isn't my best book right now, that's The Goldfinch, is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. Best thriller, you'll notice, is empty right now because I've only read one thriller this year and I didn't like it. So it's not going to be put in this spot. So I'm just waiting for a thriller that I really like. Best nonfiction is But's A Backstory by Heather Radke. My best manga is The Drifting Classroom. My best other, so I just wanted to have a little spot for a book that doesn't necessarily fit into one of these categories, and I have Paradise Rot. So I'm considering this other category to be literary horror. Then I have best series, which again, I have The Drifting Classroom. I am allowing doubles for the prizes, but I do think as the year goes on, I will have less and less doubles. So I'm just allowing it for myself right now because I do think it will change. So yeah, so the best series is The Drifting Classroom. The best book under 200 pages is Convenience Store Woman. And then for the best 2024 prize book, so far that's The Details. I read that for the International Booker long list. And then we have the prize for the book that made me cry the most. If you know me, you know that I love when a book can make me cry. And so the book that has made me cry the most so far this year is Soldier Sailor. And then we have Beautiful By, so like the book with the most beautiful book cover that I've bought so far in 2024, and I put the first volume of Cardcaptor Sakura. It's just a beautiful gold foiled hardback book. It's just beautiful. New favorite author, I haven't read anybody yet that I think would be a new favorite author. So obviously Donna Tartt is a favorite author of mine, but she's not a new favorite author. I knew that she was a favorite author of mine before 2024, before reading The Goldfinch. So I'm not putting her here. So we have yet to see who's going to be a new favorite author. Then we have the longest read. So this is time. So the book that took me the longest to read in time, and that's The Goldfinch. Of course, we already saw that took me 22 hours to read. I'm really interested to see if that's even going to be beat out because 22 hours is a long time to read the book. So we'll see. Then the book with the most pages, again, we have The Goldfinch because that was like 850 some pages. Then the oldest book that I read, and that means like published the longest ago, not that I've had it the longest. So we have The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. My disappointment, so I was really disappointed in the only one left because I loved Riley Sager's Lock Every Door, so I had really high expectations, but I was just disappointed. The worst cover, I have What I'd Rather Not Think About, which I read for the International Booker long list. And then I do have the only one left for worst and disappointment because technically it is the worst if we look at the star ratings that I've read so far this year. I'm thinking that this is going to be kicked out of this spot. I'm surely going to read something that I like less than the only one left because it was fine. It was just a huge disappointment. So I can see it staying here for a long time, but I don't imagine it's going to stay in the worst for a long time. So yeah, I love this spread. I think it's so fun. I love that I can change things out when I need to because of the Velcro as the year goes on. I just love updating the spread. I think it's so fun, and I would highly recommend that you put it in your reading journal as well. Then we have March. So again, kind of like my homepage for my March statistics. As we can see, I read 5 books the month of March. I read 5 fiction, 0 nonfiction. All of them were literary fiction this year. Again, I'm reading less and less manga as the year goes on. I need to fix that, but it's because all of these prizes have been announced. The Women's Prize for fiction and nonfiction, the International Booker. So I'm just really in prize mode right now, so it'll come back. As you can see, it's been a really good month. My lowest rating was a 4-star. So as you can see over here, I didn't put a worst book. I can't put my 4-star book as the worst book. I mean, come on. It got 4 stars. It's not bad. So I'm kind of breaking the rules a little bit and not putting a worst book, but I refuse. I can't put a 4-star as my worst book. Even though technically, if we look at the ratings, it was the worst. Then we have my different statistics for the pages, time, and hauled, and my day-to-day reading statistics. And of course, as we've already seen, Soldier Sailor was the best book that I read in March. So let's take a closer look at what books did I read in March. So as we already talked about, lots of prize books. I mean, 4 out of the 5 books were longlisted for something this month. And just to note that there's a little change on how I did my monthly things this month. I did decide to start writing down if it was translated. So like I put literary fiction translated. So literary fiction and horror translated. Literary fiction because this wasn't translated. So literary fiction translated. Literary fiction translated. And I also put what prize it was nominated for if it was. So here, Women's Prize for Fiction, long list. Women's Prize for Fiction, long list. International Booker, long list. International Booker, long list. Whereas this one, no prize, so there's nothing listed. So that was just a little change that I made. Then because in the month of March, we got the Women's Prize for Fiction long list, I made a little spread of all the books that were longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year. As you can see, I've already finished 2 of the books that were longlisted, and I did put my star rating just below so I can keep track of which one of these I have read. So obviously you can see I gave Soldier Sailor 5 stars and I gave In Defense of the Act 4.5 stars. I am in the middle of reading And Then She Fell, so once I finish that, I will come back to this spread and put the star rating, and if I choose to read any of the other books, I'll do the same. And then of course, not long after the Women's Prize for Fiction long list was announced, we had the International Booker long list. So again, I have read 2 of the books already off of this long list, the details and what I'd rather not think about, and again, I have their star ratings just below. I just think it's really fun, especially for in the future when I forget about what was longlisted, to come back to these spreads to remember, oh yeah, I forgot that was longlisted, or I forget what I rated that particular book that was longlisted. You know, I can come back and look at these spreads. And then also something that I did last year is once they announce the shortlist is that I'll make a little graphic over here on the side that says shortlisted, and then whoever wins, I'll put on the other side, you know, winner. So I'll do that for both the Women's Prize and the International Booker. Then we'll see that we're at the end of this little flip through because we're at the home page for my April statistics. You can see that I've already set this up. I'm obsessed with this new washi tape that I got. It's so cute. These little cats with these little bandanas on their head. They're so cute and so perfect for spring. So I thought it'd be fun to put it for April. Again, this washi tape and the previous one that you saw are the only 2 new washi tapes that I've used. I'll link that small shop down below in the description box if you're interested in purchasing something for yourself. But yeah, so this is my April stats homepage. I'll be filling this out throughout the month of April, and then in a few months when I do a little update, you'll be able to see this particular spread filled out and all the new spreads that I create between now and then as well, because as you can see, I couldn't resist making new spreads, so who knows what I'll come up with between now and the next update. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that you got some inspiration for your own reading journal. Definitely let me know your thoughts, or if you have any ideas for new spreads that I can do. I would love to hear them. If you like this video, please give it a like. I would really appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to have you back for future reading journal videos, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye!